how we actually measure our pressure and partial pressure. So
Never
when
mind.
we talk about
No,
one atmosphere,
they have to get themselves.
okay,
No, I told my
one
computer
atmosphere equals 760
How do I mean?
millimeters of mercury. Okay, so when we're at sea level, I'm not standing at sea level, I'm about 200 feet above sea level right here. At sea level, 760 millimeters of mercury pressure. So that's one column of atmosphere. That is actually how we define what we're talking about. Now, O2 is a partial pressure of that atmosphere, right? So partial pressure O2 at sea level is 160 millimeters of mercury, okay? 160 millimeters of mercury. That is as good as it ever gets, all right? So at best, 160 millimeters of mercury, and by the way, that is at 21% oxygen, okay? So let me clean that up a little bit. So 21% oxygen at sea level equals 160 millimeters of mercury. And that's considered partial pressure O2, all right? Now, when we talk about pulse ox, the SpO2 itself, when we talk about SpO2, I'm going to refer to that as pulse ox. That's your SpO2 percentage. Normal pulse ox ranges anywhere from 92% to 99%. Okay, if you're perfusing at a very high rate, it's up to 100%. That's pretty rare. So anywhere from 92 to 97% or 98%, even 99% is considered normal. If you're below 91% for more than 6 weeks and repeated measures, that's Medicare's definition for you need to be on oxygen. Okay. Now what that means is that at sea level, what happens is because here's another factor, and I know I'm kind of bouncing around, but hold with me. So when we talk about CO2, and we're not going to be talking about CO2 too much, okay, because then we start talking about 20 different sets of numbers, but we'll get there. So CO2 is 25 times more water soluble than O2. Okay, so what happens is that when you're at sea level and you've got 160 millimeters of mercury, by the time it gets all the way into the alveoli, instead of 160, there's about a 35% drop because of this solubility issue with CO2, and we have water droplets into the alveoli. Now instead of 160, it's 104, okay, because of that displacement. Now, let's say your SpO2, in other words, your saturation rate is 95%. That means that 95% of 104 millimeters of mercury is actually getting pushed in, is being absorbed by hemoglobin. Okay, so that's what the SpO2 gives you, all right? SpO2 is a percentage of hemoglobin perfusion, not perfusion, but concentration in the bloodstream, all right? So if you're at 91% or lower, you're in trouble, okay? And when you take a look at especially your neuropathy patients, we're not even talking about lung disease patients, COPD, pulmonary fibrosis, pulmonary hypertension. We're not talking about those people. We're talking about healthy lung tissue individuals, but they have a problem like neuropathy. When you take a look at their feet, okay, those individuals typically are perfusing their SpO2, their pulse ox can be in the high to low 80s, all right? And they're not getting blood to their tissues, right? So that's a big, big, big problem, okay? So one of the things that is very, very important for our patients is to actually get them to perfuse their tissues, because docs, the reality is that O2 is the foundation for regenerative processes in the human body. If you don't have O2 going into your tissues, it doesn't matter what you're doing, okay? I mean, literally, we can live 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 to 5 minutes without oxygen. That's how important it is. And I'm just going to tell you this, right? There is no healthy tissue in the human body. There is no healthy tissue in the human body that oxygen doesn't go into. All right, there is tissue that oxygen doesn't go into, but it's unhealthy tissue. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so because of ideal gas law, okay, when we start talking about millimeters of mercury and partial pressures of O2, we talk about gas exchange. Gas exchange happens, it's set, okay? It is what it is. It wants to move from a low pressure state to a high pressure state. It wants to find equilibrium, all right? So if we've got 85 millimeters of mercury, partial pressure O2, and we got 104 millimeters of mercury, it wants to move up to the 104. It's just the way it is, okay? That's ideal gas law. So in the human body, it's not how much gas we can exchange, all right, because your body will move as much gas as is there. So as the blood goes by the alveoli, by the way, it only takes a quarter of a second, 0.25 seconds for that bloodstream to go by the alveoli. When we are dealing with resting tissue, this blood is coming back from the body. It's headed back to the pulmonary system. It is at about 40 millimeters of mercury, partial pressure O2. So this is deoxygenated blood. As it passes by the alveoli, we have a contrast between 40 millimeters of mercury and 104 millimeters of mercury. So what happens? We exchange, right? So we got CO2 here as well in a higher pressure rate. We're not going to talk too much. So CO2 gets expelled and we exchange O2. All right, so as it goes by, now it's not 40 millimeters of mercury, it's 104 millimeters of mercury. Now it's oxygenated blood, headed back out to our tissues. Partial pressure O2, okay? That is as good as it ever gets. You're standing at the beach, breathing the air, 104 millimeters of mercury. Now, remember what I talked about your pulse ox, your SpO2? That means that if you're at 95% of the hemoglobin in your body is saturated with O2. Okay? Well, if you're at 90%, that's a problem. Okay, because you're not at 104, now you're at a much lower rate. All right? Now, what happens is, let's talk about, this is muscle tissue. At rest, typically, so if you're sitting on the couch watching Game of Thrones, 40 millimeters of mercury, partial pressure of O2. All right? So that means we got 40 millimeters of mercury here. So as the blood comes, it donates O2, right? So we go from 40 to 104 millimeters of mercury. Okay, no longer at 40, then we're 104 because it was resting tissue. What happens there? Well, it uses oxygen to create ATP. All right, that's what actually creates cellular activity. So the ATP gets blown off, cellular activities occur. We go back, at resting, we go back to 40 millimeters of mercury, partial pressure O2. And that's what goes back in the bloodstream, all right? So we go from 104 to 104 to 40 to 40. That's the basic aspects of what happens in gas exchange. Now, here's what's critical about this. Whatever we have in the alveoli is it's the maximum we can take it to in the blood. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much more about SpO2 until a little bit later. I don't want to get too confused with what's happening there. So now, when it comes to exercise with oxygen therapy and all the research out there, it's really based on performance model, VO2 max, how much oxygen can we get in, and everybody has looked at the concentrated side, okay? So they're saying that anything above 80% oxygen rate is great, okay? And that's true, all right? So let me talk a little bit about what happens there. So when you take a look at what happens with the total brain and body O2, we are easily capable of creating 85% oxygen, okay? This is not a pressurized liquid O2. that requires a cannula. No, is you use a concentrator, then we use a bag system to basically hold it. So that means that we can easily generate 85% oxygen there that the body can actually use. Well, 85% oxygen is right at 646 millimeters of mercury. Okay, 646 millimeters of mercury. That's partial pressure of O2. So when we put somebody in a mask, put the total brain body O2 into high O2, they're breathing in 646 millimeters of mercury, partial pressure of O2. Now, remember, CO2 is 25 times more soluble, so by the time it actually gets into the alveoli, it's 420 millimeters. Okay? Now, what happens when it gets into the bloodstream? Theoretically, it should be able to go up to 420 millimeters of mercury based on ideal gas law. Okay. Now we start talking about how much O2 you can actually carry in solution per deciliter of blood. What that's 0.03 milliliters of O2 divided by liter of blood times millimeters of mercury times partial pressure. Okay, so we're not going to talk about that. That gets too confusing. All right. So I just want you to think about this number right here. Okay. 420 millimeters of mercury. That's what we can use in the high O2. Now, let's talk about the low side, okay? Because in my research, in my clinical application, I'm finding that the low O2 is much, much more powerful. So, we're easily capable of creating a 13% oxygen with the total brain and body O2, okay? 13% oxygen. That means that we drop down to 98 millimeters of mercury partial pressure O2. Okay. So when you're under mild to moderate exercise, breathing 98 millimeters, by the time it gets here, we're not at 98, we're at 68 millimeters of mercury. Okay. So let's talk about that. So as the blood comes back, and mind you, right now it's at rest. When we're at rest and we start this whole process, I start you off on depleted oxygen, okay? I want 3 minutes of exercise. So that means we go from 104 at best to 68. 68 millimeters of mercury. It goes to the tissue. Now what happens here is that I have you under mild to moderate exercise. I like a vibration plate with a cross curl, okay, with weights in your hands while you're breathing. So in exercise, because you're burning up more O2, you're actually at 20 millimeters of mercury. All right. So now, as we shunt O2 in here, as we shunt O2 in low, it's no longer 104, 68. Now it's at 68. And on top of that, I've got you exercising. So what happens is this drops to 20, this drops to 20, right? Which means the returning blood drops to 20. Now, I want you in that low O2, depleted. I want you there for 5 minutes. And guys, if you have any questions, just type them up. Elizabeth will get them out to me. So I don't want you there for 5 minutes. I want you there for 3. I want you there for 3 because it takes your body about 2 minutes to go through its oxygen reserves. Okay. So what happens is, now remember your pulse ox, right? If you were at 95% when you started, I want to drive that as low as I can. Okay. So if I have you in here, low O2 for 3 minutes, your body goes through its O2 reserves in 2. That means you're going to be mild to moderate oxygen, mild to moderate exercise for another 60 seconds. And I want to drop that 95% down to 89 if I can. or lower. I don't want it much below 80%. If you're at 80% for any period of time, you'll pass out, you might have a seizure. I don't want you down. But if I can drive your pulse ox down low, that means that your perfusion is lower. Okay, so that means that you're, instead of 95% of the 68 millimeters of mercury, you're only getting 89% because you got less and less and less. The factor here is this gets lower. All right. Now, what does that do? That does something very specific. EPO is now comes into play. EPO, erythropoietin, very, very important factor. Okay, because as I'm talking about this, the ideal gas law is not it's not the deciding factor on how much oxygen you can carry. Hemoglobin is the deciding factor. How much hemoglobin you have in your system, which is directly related to how many red blood cells. Okay. Now, as you drop here, okay, when you're in this state, you go into a sympathetic response. Okay, that sympathetic response is immediately evaluated through EPO. You kick out more EPO at about 2 to 3 minutes. All right, that you get an immediate expulsion from the spleen of red blood cells that are in storage. That means you get an immediate capacity of increased hemoglobin. All right, so I increase your capacity to actually carry oxygen. All right, we do that for 3 minutes. Now, at the 3-minute mark, when I've dropped your pulse ox as low as I can, okay, and I'm keeping you down as low as I can in your millimeters of mercury, partial pressure of O2, we're going to flip you into high O2. Remember what we were talking about. When we flip you into high O2, you're breathing 646. By the time it gets to the alveoli, it's 420. Now, this is what I was talking about, amount of O2 in solution. There's not a lot of real good information out there about how much millimeters of mercury can actually be absorbed per deciliter of O2 in a high oxygen state. Okay, it's there, but it's not. I don't believe anybody's really looked at it from the standpoint. I know they have. I just hadn't found it. I don't know the science, so I'm not going to say that we can put 420 millimeters of mercury into the bloodstream. I can say, based on what I've seen, that I can take it with the total brain and body up to 250 millimeters of mercury. So what happens is, when that occurs, you are suddenly shunting in 250 millimeters of mercury into the muscle cell. Well, it's at exercise. I immediately have you stop exercising. So the contrast between the two is significant. Right? So you perfuse at a very high rate. So your tissue can literally suck up all of this extra O2. This goes back to 40 or a little bit higher. It could be 80. All right. So now we're returning 80 millimeters of mercury blood back to the alveoli. But because of ideal gas law, we're still dealing with 420 millimeters of mercury, okay, which I say that we can take up to 250. We keep them in that state for about 2 minutes. Have them perfuse at a very high rate. Now, here's what happens. They're here, okay? In order for them to go from 89 to 98, a normal individual that may be conditioned or ill, that typically takes anywhere from 45 to 120 seconds. Okay? All right. Most individuals do it between 45 and 60, but it depends on how sick they are. So they go from 89 to 98%. All right. By the time they actually get to 98%, I'm calling that SpO2 recovery time. All right. And I want to know how long that factor is, because when you first start off, if it takes you 60 seconds, and then 5 sessions later, it takes you 15 seconds, that means you're perfusing at a much higher rate, and that whole system is working better. Now, remember I said, with EPO being monitored like that, you get an immediate rush of red blood cells, okay, from the spleen. Now, because of that, what happens is this occurs, and this occurs. 5 days later, the bone marrow gives you more. Okay? You get another influx, if I can spell. You get another influx of, not O2, of red blood cells, which means hemoglobin. Okay? Now, the average lifespan of of red blood cells is 120 days. All right? So if you do the total brain and body O2, the 5-minute depleted protocol, at least twice a week, you're going to get concomitant increase in red blood cell activity, which means more red blood cells, which means it increases your overall capacity to carry oxygen. That is critical, critical, critical. If you don't do that, you can't help those patients with peripheral neuropathy to actually oxygenate their tissue and perfuse their tissue. It's very, very important. So the same thing with a stem cell. If you're doing stem cell or regenerative medicine injections, the key factor in that, and actually what it makes is what's happening with how much oxygen perfusion there is, okay? You gotta be able to get oxygen into the tissue. If you're not doing that, it doesn't matter if they're changing their diet, how much rebuilder, HACO-Med, PMF, it just doesn't matter, right? Because you can't heal that tissue without those steps. That's why this protocol is absolutely important. And it's 5 minutes, guys. It's 5 minutes. It only takes 5 minutes to make this happen, okay? That doesn't mean that it's just for your neuropathy patients. That means it can be for all your chiropractic patients, okay? That is absolutely critical. Take a look at that. Do we have any questions, Elizabeth? No, not right now. Yeah, guys, if you have any questions, let us know. I want to let you know that we're actually going to be at Chiro Expo in Dallas this weekend, Friday and Saturday. And we're actually going to be able to debut. Yeah, we'll actually be able to debut. Go ahead, bring it in. Well, actually, yeah, we'll be able to debut. We're going to be able to debut our new repackage on the Total Brain Body O2. JT, in his brilliance, has actually named it the console. If you've ever seen our performance model is what this one's going to be from here on out. It takes up a little bit of room. Okay, it's very well put together. It's overbuilt in my estimation, but there's a fantastic thing coming. All right, we've repackaged it so that it actually fits in a much smaller space. It looks like a high-end piece of equipment, actually a high-end piece of furniture, which is super important. So again, guys, if you have any questions about how the Total Brain and Body O2 actually works, just let us know. And post those questions. I'll be happy to answer those. Next week, we're going to be doing our actual Neon Track webinar. Okay, so I want you to tune in for that. And then on top of that, the day after that, so that 12th, we're going to do the Neon Track webinar, question and answer and training session. The day on the 13th, I'm going to do a specific sales and on sales scripts that you teach your patients exactly what they need to do. Okay, so guys, take a look. We're going to pan over. That is. So this is the repackage on the Total Brain Body O2. Smaller package, has just as much capacity. Basically, what we did, we redesigned the way the bags are working. Everything fits inside of this console. All right. Basically, all that needs to be on here is computer screen, keyboard, the mouse. The bags fit completely in here, concentrator, and then the computer. Everything's very accessible. So we're going to be showcasing this at Chiro Expo this weekend, Friday and Saturday. So come by if you're going to be in the Dallas area, take a look at it. Get on and do the 5-minute depleted protocol and figure out just how great that piece of equipment is.
We have a question from Dr. Lance Carroll. What is the best way to program this protocol into the system to be able to use it on every patient every time?
That is a great question. Right now, you have to use the steady state protocol, okay? So when you take a look at, let's do that real quick. I'll cover this up. And I don't know if you can actually see this. Carol, there's no way to program it right now, specific, but when you hit the start button, if it lets you, there you go. You hit the start button, you go to where it says control mode, hit that, steady state. Now, what you have to do is when you hit the low O2 exit target, okay, you have to predict what that patient's target's going to be, all right? Right now it's set at 111. My typical target is 105 for myself. That's something you have to learn for the patient. So that means that patient has to hit that heart rate at the 3-minute mark in order for it to switch automatically. Otherwise, you have to hit the force O2. Our new protocol, which we're in testing, probably our 5th build on the testing protocol is called SpO2 burst. It is going to be a timed mode. So you're going to have 3 modes now. You're going to have control mode, steady state, and then there's going to be SpO2 burst. And this is specifically designed for what we're talking about right now. And I thank JT and Linda and Jean because it's been a struggle. And I basically threw a wall-eyed fit because I wanted this, and they have provided. We're just working through the intricacies of it. What that's actually going to do is going to give you time, okay? You get to decide if it starts in high O2 or low O2. So you start it in low O2. You define how many minutes they're in low O2. 3 minutes. You define how many minutes they are in high O2, okay? 2 minutes. There's going to be 2 safety parameters. You're going to set, if the heart rate gets too high, okay, so you set it at 145. If their heart rate spikes above 145, they immediately get switched into high O2. The other parameter is SpO2. If their SpO2 drops below 85, you don't want them below that, it kicks them into high O2, okay? This is very, very important for your asthmatic patients. Very, very important for your asthmatic patients because they typically will spike into their sympathetic response very quickly, okay? And so they go into panic mode and they need high O2. When you're using that for those particular individuals, it's really cool because you can start to see them actually improve how quickly the asthma onsets because those people are very, very CO2 sensitive. I've got some other ideas on exactly what we're going to be doing for COPD and things of that nature.
All right, so Dr. Robbie, please explain the difference in using total brain and body for athletes and the new 5-minute protocol for chronically ill patients.
Okay. So, look, the exercise with oxygen protocols were all designed on performance enhancement. Okay, we're trying to drive a high-level athlete into higher levels. All right, that means that you start them in high O2, you set another target heart rate. Let's say it's 130. All right, once they hit 130, it shifts them into low O2. Well, guess what? In order for them to get out of low O2 and get back to high O2, they got to go to 140. Once they hit 140, they go into a rest mode, flip back into high O2. They go into recovery mode, which is basically means we're looking for their heart rate to get down to say 105. And then we ask them to do it again. That is what's called adaptive contrast. Okay, the reality is that if you got an ill patient, it don't matter. You can't, I can't do that. Okay, I'm not an ill patient, but I'm certainly deconditioned. And so it's very difficult to make that happen. You're all good? Any other questions? No? Okay. Like I said, drop by Carol Texpo this weekend. We also have, excuse me, I got parched. Secret to $1 Million Practice coming up September 27th and 28th. Okay. JT is on a tear. When he gets his way, and he is, we're going to give him away a back on track, a knee on track, $5,000 in cash prizes. You bring a doctor that knows nothing about our equipment, you're going to get extra entries into those drawings. So set time aside. That Thursday, the 26th, I'll be doing certification and training for docs who want to come in early. That afternoon, we'll crank up about 4 o'clock, do about 4 hours or whatever you can stand on the knee on track, back on track, and total brain and body O2, and going through all those different things. We're going to have a mastermind dinner for the first 10 people to buy tickets. So you sit down with some of the mastermind speakers that we have. You'll sit down with me, you'll sit down with Dr. Tony Ramus, Dr. Barlow if he's available, Dr. Vitanzi. So a lot of our great speakers that are coming in, they're going to actually sit down in a more intimate situation and speak to you about practice management, practice building, really how to take your secrets to $1 million practice. It should be a secret to a multi-million-dollar practice. That's how much value we're bringing to the table. Okay, guys? So again, September 27th, 28th. JT, you have a question?
How their response to this.
Yeah, so let's take a look at it. Anybody have any responses? They like it, they don't like it? So what do y'all think about it? You like the design? Do you think it's too shiny? Not shiny enough? It needs some more bling?
Shoot us an email.
Shoot us an email. Okay, cool. All right, we'll send a picture and kind of get your feedback on this. We will be doing some retrofit for those docs that want it. Okay, so and we'll talk more about that, but there'll be some special pricing if this fits into your space better, or you're happy with what you got. Great, perfect. But there'll be some other changes as well. So there'll be some interesting things going on with everything. All right, guys, thanks so much. Again, don't forget about September 27th, 28th. Next week, we've got the Knee on Track webinar, and then the sales webinar the day after that, talking about specifics, on how to talk to your patients with specific scripts and specific words so that you can get them to take action on the recommendations that you have for your patients. All right, guys, have a great one. Keep saving lives.